I built a self-sustaining habitat in this tiny aquarium, and over many months it will grow into a flourishing little ecosystem. I definitely made some mistakes along the way. I needed to learn how to balance this tank in order to make it a suitable living space for all of the creatures that we're going to call it home. This is part 1 of the Crustacean Cube series, and the story of how I put together the tank that started everything. I found this little tank on Marketplace, and the seller said he'd give it to me for half price if I picked it up the same day, so I did. And I guess I decided to make him the mascot. I went to get some rocks and wood for the hardscape, and while I was there I had a look at this guy's fancy tanks because he also sells plant clippings, but I didn't plan on getting anything because I was leaving for work for 4 days and I wouldn't have time to set up the tank. So, naturally, I left with a bucket of plants and a few snails. The problem is I'd never put together a tank before, let alone film the process. I knew the plants would be fine, but I didn't know if the snails would survive in a bucket for 4 days. I laid out my hardscape options and started testing them out. I was aiming for something natural looking that would also be a good plant nursery for when I decided to put together the next tank. In my mind, the art of hardscaping has 2 general principles: balance and flow. You have to dance the line between them. If you put 2 large rocks in, it might be balanced, but the flow might be cramped. It's also important to look at the strata, or layers, in the rocks and wood to make sure they complement each other instead of being contradictory. Eventually, I settled on something I was happy with. The benefit of filming everything is that I didn't have to use my memory to remember where all the pieces went, because now I'd have to take everything apart to clean the tank before adding soil underneath the gravel. I rinsed the gravel because I didn't know what kind of waste could be in there, and then I got to work on the tank. I started with water, and then used isopropyl alcohol to sanitize the inside. Then I used glass cleaner for the outside of the tank. The whole process took around 30 minutes. I got some Aquasoil to put in the bottom of the tank to provide nutrients to the plants. These little pellets also come packed with dormant bacteria that would help get the nitrogen cycle going in my tank. This is the first step in creating an ecosystem. We need the bacteria to help process the fish waste. Otherwise, the levels of ammonia will just rise and rise until it becomes toxic to the tank inhabitants. I used this sand as a capping layer to help slow the exchange of nutrients and gases between the substrate and the water column. This tank wasn't going to use anything but the plants as a filter, so it wouldn't have any extra cushion against swings in water parameters. And making sure I nailed the substrate could make a huge difference. Then I began laying down the gravel. I wanted it to be close to 2 inches thick, because below 2 inches, oxygen has a hard time penetrating, and I'd hopefully get some anaerobic bacteria going on there to complete the nitrogen cycle. Before I put the hardscape back in, I used super glue to fix the 2 pieces of wood together. I used the tissue paper method to fill in gaps and create a stronger bond. I finally began laying the hardscape back into the tank. Unfortunately, the wood fell apart, so I went back to the glue. And it fell apart again. I finally decided to just glue it and put it in tree detention. I then began the very slow process of filling up the tank with a measuring cup. Honestly, it was the best solution I had at the time. I wanted to fill the tank first so that if I didn't plant something firmly enough, it wouldn't just float up to the top when I filled it. Then the planting. I think the most difficult part of this hobby is actually just remembering all the different plant names. So to be honest, I don't remember what most of these are called. Then I glued this Java moss and Riccia moss to the tree. I wanted the moss to kind of wrap around the tree and create a lot of space for the shrimp to hide in. Don't mind my math homework. I had filled up the tank to see if I added enough rocks to the wood to stop it from floating, but unfortunately, I made a lot of work for myself, as I wasn't done planting yet. This rock was getting in the way of where I wanted to place this red plant, so I had to remove it in order to access it. I had to repeat certain steps and tweak things as I went more often than I would have liked to. But this is what you're asking for if you attempt your first ever aquascape on a strict time limit whilst trying to film it all. I guess I'm my own worst enemy. Or worst friend? I haven't decided yet. Now to fill up the tank again. I had a small leakage issue along the way. Lesson learned, always keep your hose fastened. I added some floating plants next, but the store accidentally sold me dead ones. Bruh. They did, however, refund me and give me some salvinia from their tanks. I wanted to create a gap so the light could reach through the surface without the floating plants getting in the way. So I took some extra airline tubing and glued it together as a temporary solution. It didn't look nice, but it would work for now until I could find another one. The snails didn't seem to mind though. Then I went off to work and I let the tank sit. When I got home from work, some packages had arrived for me. They were full of aquascaping tools to make my life easier. I also picked up some wood because I wanted to create a base for the tank. It was small enough that I was pretty sure I'd be able to move the tank without disrupting it too much, or breaking it. I took the floating plants out and removed some water to make it lighter. I also replanted the red plant because once I put the cube in its final position, I wouldn't be able to access them as easily. Tanks are surprisingly heavy, but I managed to move it without breaking anything. After I moved it, I also placed it on its base. I made it a tiny bit smaller so that once the tank was on there, it would almost look like it was hovering. I mean, I guess it kind of works. I don't know, I think it looks pretty good. Then I filled up the tank. Again. This time with better equipment. Even though it was only snails in at the moment, it was nice to see some life moving about the tank. This little ramshorn just went up and down this one stem plant for hours cleaning it. Now I just needed to let the tank sit for a month or so it could cycle. In the meantime, I just kept an eye on the water parameters. After a month, I was able to see plant roots digging through the gravel to find nutrients. This meant the plants were establishing well. The tank looked quite healthy too. Even this red plant, which I really didn't think was going to make it. And a healthy layer of biofilm had grown over the surface, which is a good sign. It's a protein layer that builds up, and it's a great food source for snails and shrimp. Right as my patience was reaching its limit, my package had finally arrived. The first crustaceans to be added to the cube were finally here. I needed to get them out of the bag and into another container so I could acclimate them properly before adding them to the tank. The only thing I could find was this vase, but it would work better than the measuring cup. Most people in the aquarium hobby are very familiar with these shrimp. These are Neocaridina, also called cherry shrimp. To be specific, these are a sun-kissed orange color morph of them. They, along with the snails, are going to be the cleanup crew of our little ecosystem. My clamps had gone missing, so I used some nose strips to fasten down the hose. I learned my lesson last time. And I tied a knot into the hose so I could control the number of drips per second. Finally, it was time to add them to the tank. I didn't mean to dump them in quite so harshly. They just got right back to doing what they do best. Cleaning. It was fun to watch them do their thing. For the most part, they just sat there, eating and looking adorable. Those extra legs under their belly are called pleopods, and the females will use them to hold onto their eggs before they hatch. I was hoping we'd get to see a new generation of shrimp in the next couple of months. Then I let them settle in overnight. The next day, I saw a motionless orange body on the bottom of the tank. It made me a little sad, but I left him there because his body would be recycled into the tank, incorporated into the soil and plants. And in that way, he lives on, helping to sustain this little ecosystem. Finally. No. Who might this be? You're not supposed to be here yet. Thank you for watching my very first video, everybody. I hope you liked it. If you did, please subscribe, and I'll be coming out with part 2 very soon.